The dusty shelf and the quiet man the bookstore was small, not the kind of place you'd notice while walking down the street. It was tucked between a quiet cafe and an old tailor shop, its sign half faded and its windows dusty. The shop was called Turning Pages, and the man who owned it was known simply as Mr. Horace. He had run the shop for over 30 years and he didn't like change. The shelves were filled with rare books, some first editions, some handwritten, and many that no one had asked for in years. On a rainy Tuesday morning, Keanu Reeves stepped inside. He wore a dark hoodie, jeans, and old boots. His face was partially hidden beneath the hood and he looked like any tired traveler trying to get out of the cold. But his eyes, quiet, thoughtful, moved slowly across the room, taking in every shelf, every corner, every book like they held secrets. Mr. Horace barely glanced up. He didn't get many customers, and he didn't care much anymore who came in. He wiped his glasses with the corner of his sweater and returned to the old leather-bound book he had been reading behind the counter. Keanu moved gently between the shelves, running his hand along the spines of books like he was touching memories. After about 20 minutes, he found it. A thin, hand-stitched journal, no title on the cover. Its leather was cracked and the pages inside looked fragile, like they might crumble from just one breath. But something about it felt alive. He took it to the counter. Mr. Horace looked up and frowned. "Not for sale?" he said sharply, not even touching the book. "That one's from my father's collection. It's not in the system." Keanu smiled softly. "I understand," he said gently. "But it's exactly what I need. For a project, a role, actually. I'm preparing for a character who's lost. This book might help me find him." Mr. Horace squinted at him. "You an actor or something?" "I am," Keanu said with a nod, not offering his name. "Well, like I said, not for sale. It's personal. Go find something else." Keanu looked at the book again, then back at the old man. "Would you consider letting me borrow it? I can promise to return it in perfect condition. Or maybe I could talk to you about your father. Understand why this book mattered." "This isn't a library," Mr. Horace snapped, growing irritated. "And I'm not here to tell stories. You can leave now." Keanu looked disappointed, but not angry. He set the book down carefully and nodded. "Thank you anyway," he said. Then just as quietly as he came, he walked out into the rain. Mr. Horace muttered under his breath and returned to his own reading. He didn't even look out the window to watch Keanu leave. But a young woman behind one of the shelves had watched everything. Her name was Emily. She worked at the cafe next door and often came in on breaks to read in silence. She knew exactly who the man was the moment he walked in. She had grown up watching his films, admiring the quiet strength he brought to his roles. But more than that, she had read about the man behind the camera, the kindness, the losses, the humility. When Keanu walked out, she followed. She found him standing under the awning of the tailor shop, watching the rain fall. "He can be rough," she said softly, standing beside him. Keanu turned and smiled. "He's guarding something important. I respect that. But that book, why that one?" Keanu's eyes were distant now, like he was in another world. "It reminded me of someone I lost. There's a feeling in it, like grief was stitched into the binding." Emily was quiet for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. Why didn't you just tell him who you were? He might have given it to you." Keanu looked at her and shook his head. "That's not who I am. If someone only says yes because of my name, then it's not real." Emily nodded slowly. Then, out of nowhere, she asked, "Do you want a coffee? On the house?" Keanu chuckled. "Only if you're having one too." They walked back to the cafe together. Emily made 2 hot cups and they sat by the window. Rain tapped gently on the glass as strangers passed by, unaware of the moment forming inside. Meanwhile, back in the bookstore, Mr. Horace had opened the thin journal again. He stared at the first page where an old photograph was tucked inside. It was him and his father. The handwriting on the page said, "When words fail, stories heal." His fingers trembled slightly. Outside, the rain was beginning to slow. Keanu looked out and said, "Sometimes when a door closes, you have to knock again. Not because you want to force it open, but because maybe, just maybe, the person behind it wasn't ready the first time." Emily stared at him, unsure what to say. "Then," she whispered, "what role are you playing?" Keanu looked down at his coffee. "A man who lost everything, and has to find his way through grief not by moving forward, but by looking back." Suddenly something shifted in the air. A feeling, like the story had just begun, and in the quiet of that small town where nothing ever changed, everything was about to. The pages begin to speak the next morning. The town was unusually quiet. The rain had passed, leaving the streets damp and shining under the soft morning sun. Birds returned to the trees, and the smell of fresh bread from the nearby bakery floated into the air. Mr. Horace was already in the bookstore. He had slept, poorly, haunted by memories he hadn't thought about in years. He had dreamed of his father, a tall man with kind but tired eyes, who had once told him, "Books remember us when no one else does." He sat behind the counter, the same journal open in front of him. He stared at the faded ink on the second page. It wasn't a story. It was a letter. "Dear son, if you're reading this, it means you're old enough to understand pain. I kept this journal not for my work, but for my thoughts I couldn't say out loud. You were too young to remember your mother, but every night I wrote to her in these pages. This book isn't just paper. It's memory. And memory is how we keep love alive." Mr. Horace blinked hard and closed the book. He rubbed his temples, annoyed that he felt emotions he had buried long ago. Meanwhile, across town, Keanu sat at a corner table in the cafe. He hadn't left the town yet. Something about the place felt unfinished. Emily brought him another cup of coffee. "You're still here?" she said with a smile. Keanu nodded. "I keep thinking about the journal." Emily sat across from him, lowering her voice. "I heard he used to be different. Before his wife died, he used to tell stories to every customer who walked in. People say his heart shut down the day she passed." Keanu looked thoughtful. "Sometimes people don't grieve by crying. They grieve by building walls." Emily leaned in. "What if we tried again? Together?" Keanu gave a half smile. "What do you mean?" "What if we just talked to him? Not as fans, not as actors, but as people who care about stories." Keanu thought for a moment, then nodded. They walked to the bookstore together. When they entered, Mr. Horace looked up, instantly annoyed. "You again?" Keanu stepped forward respectfully. "I'm sorry to bother you again. I didn't come to buy the journal this time. I came to listen, if you're willing to talk." Mr. Horace narrowed his eyes. What would a Hollywood actor care about an old man's stories? Keanu glanced at Emily and then said quietly, "Because I lost someone too. And sometimes hearing someone else's story is the only way to face your own." The room went silent. Mr. Horace stared at Keanu, unsure whether to be angry or moved. His lips tightened, then he stood and turned away, muttering, "Follow me." He led them to a small room in the back of the store. There were boxes of old letters, faded photographs, and books with no price tags. He pulled out a chair for himself and sat. Keanu and Emily remained standing. "That journal," Mr. Horace said slowly, "was written during the worst time of my father's life. When my mother passed, he didn't speak to anyone, but he wrote every single night." Keanu asked gently, "Did you ever read the whole thing?" Mr. Horace looked down. "Never. I was afraid of what I'd feel." Keanu nodded with understanding. "Would you let me read it with you? Maybe we both find something we need." There was a long pause. Then finally Mr. Horace stood and walked to the front counter. He picked up the journal, held it for a second, then handed it to Keanu. "If you damage this, I'll never forgive you." Keanu held the journal carefully, like it was glass. "I promise I won't." They returned to the back room. Emily made tea from the small kettle behind the shop, and the three of them sat in a tight circle, the journal resting on the table between them. Keanu opened the first page again. Slowly he began to read aloud. "When words fail, stories heal." He looked up at Mr. Horace. That was your father's opening line. Mr. Horace said nothing, but his hands were shaking. They continued reading together. The entries spoke of love, pain, fear, and hope, the grief of losing a spouse, the quiet moments of fatherhood, the guilt of not knowing how to comfort a child. Mr. Horace's breathing grew heavier. Tears formed in his eyes. "I was angry for so long," he whispered. Not at her, at him, for writing instead of talking. Keanu put a hand on his shoulder. "He didn't write to avoid you. He wrote because he didn't know how to say it out loud." The room went still again. Emily spoke softly. "There's something healing in this. I think others might feel it too." Keanu looked at Mr. Horace. "Would you let me use some of these pages in the film? Not for fame, not for credit, but because this is a story the world needs." Mr. Horace didn't answer right away. He reached into one of the boxes and pulled out a photo of his parents, young, smiling, holding hands in front of the same bookstore decades ago. "Maybe it's time," he whispered. "Maybe it's time someone heard what he never got to say." Keanu closed the journal gently and looked out the window. "Thank you," he said. As they left the shop, Mr. Horace looked after them. His store, once filled with silence, now felt like it was breathing again. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. The role begins to awaken. The journal sat on the passenger seat of Keanu's rented car as he drove slowly through the winding hills just outside town. The sky above was golden, casting long shadows across the road. The book, though small, felt like it weighed as much as a suitcase full of memories. It wasn't just a prop now. It was a window into a broken soul, a quiet father, and a son who had waited a lifetime to understand him. Keanu had read it cover to cover, twice after leaving the shop. Alone in the rented cabin just outside town, he had stayed up all night under a dim lamp, reading until his eyes blurred, and with each page something in him stirred. Emotions he had long buried started bubbling to the surface. The character he was preparing to play, Michael, a grieving musician who had lost his wife and turned to silence, was beginning to come alive. But he wasn't acting anymore. He was remembering the nights he spent alone after his own losses, remembering the weight of absence, the silence that grew heavier with time. When he returned to the town the next morning, Emily greeted him outside the cafe with a gentle smile. "You didn't sleep much," she said. Keanu smiled weakly. It wasn't the kind of night for sleep. She motioned him to sit. She had brewed him his usual coffee without asking. "He's different now," she said, referring to Mr. Horace. "After you left yesterday, he started talking to customers, told a teenager the story of how he got the bookstore sign made by hand in 1968. I've never even heard him say hello before." Keanu looked down at the coffee, then back up. "The journal didn't just unlock something in me. It unlocked something in him." Emily watched him carefully. "So what now?" Keanu took a deep breath. "I want to base my performance on this story, but not just the character's grief. I want to capture what it means to hold on to something, painful for too long, and finally let go." Just then, a car pulled up near the cafe. Two men in suits stepped out. One of them, Greg, was Keanu's agent. The other, Daniel, was the director of the upcoming film. They walked toward the cafe. With surprised expressions. "Keanu?" Greg asked. "What are you still doing in this town?" "We've got rehearsals scheduled. The studio's asking questions." Keanu stood and greeted them. "I found something here," he said simply. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "In this place?" Keanu nodded and pulled the journal from his coat. "This book. It's better than any script you've handed me. It's real. Raw. We need to rewrite Michael. He isn't just a musician in pain. He's a man who speaks through silence, like the man who wrote this." Daniel took the journal and flipped through the pages. After a moment, he stopped, reading one entry quietly. Then he looked up. "This is haunting. Beautiful." Greg looked uneasy. Can we even use this? Who owns it? Keanu turned to Emily. Come with me. They walked to the bookstore together, Greg and Daniel following. Behind. Inside, Mr. Horace was stacking books. He looked up and his face lit up, a little awkwardly but genuine. Back again? Keanu nodded. I want to ask your permission to use your father's journal as the foundation for the film. Mr. Horace looked at the men behind Keanu. These, your Hollywood people? Yes, Keanu said, but they're not here to take anything from you, only to listen. Mr. Horace was quiet. He walked over to the journal, placed his hand on it, then looked directly at Daniel. This isn't a story to make money, it's a story about pain, about losing the love of your life and still finding a way to speak to her through ink and paper. If you're going to use it, you have to promise me it stays honest. Daniel nodded. We'll keep every word pure. Mr. Horace turned to Keanu. Then it's yours. Later that evening, inside the cabin, Daniel, Keanu, and Emily sat around a table covered in scripts, notebooks, and loose pages. They had started reworking scenes from the movie, blending Michael's fictional story with the real emotions written in the journal. Michael should write letters he never sends, Keanu said, like the journal entries. And he should keep her picture in the back of his guitar case, Emily added, just like Mr. Horace's father kept one in the journal. Daniel smiled. You two are turning this into something special. But that night, alone again, Keanu couldn't sleep. He stood outside on the porch, staring at the stars. The journal was in his hands, opened to one of the final entries. They say time heals all wounds, but I think time just teaches us to carry them better. My love, if you're out there somewhere, know this. I wrote for you because you were the only one who ever heard me when I couldn't speak. Keanu felt his chest tighten. He closed the book and sat down on the steps, staring into the dark. He whispered, I understand now. But across town, something unexpected was happening. A reporter from a small local paper had seen Keanu walking into the bookstore the other day. She hadn't thought much of it, until someone tipped her off that he was still there days later. And when she asked Emily at the cafe who the man was that kept ordering black coffee with a quiet smile, Emily had answered honestly. The next morning, an article was published online. Keanu Reeves spotted in Sleepy Town bookstore, working on secret project. It spread faster than anyone expected. Within hours, dozens of people were talking about the story. Fans drove in from nearby cities. News vans rolled into the streets. Social media flooded with photos taken outside the bookstore and cafe. Hashtags trended. Mr. Horace's quiet world was suddenly not so quiet anymore. He stood at the window watching strangers take selfies with the bookstore sign, and for a moment fear crept in. Not fear of the crowd, but fear that his father's memories were about to be turned into a circus. Keanu returned later that morning, walking into the store as he had on that first rainy day. But this time, Mr. Horace didn't snap. He simply asked, Did you see the news? Keanu nodded. What happens now? Mr. Horace asked. Keanu answered gently, Now we tell the story right. Not for them, for him. And as the buzz outside grew louder, the three of them, Keanu, Mr. Horace, and Emily, began something rare. They decided to protect a memory by turning it into truth. When memories meet the world, the noise outside grew louder by the hour. What had once been a quiet, forgotten street was now full of cars, cameras, curious fans, and reporters, pushing microphones toward anyone who looked important. The cafe next door had a line stretching down the block. Someone even started selling T-shirts that said, I found Keanu at Turning Pages. Inside the bookstore, however, time moved differently. Mr. Horace had refused every interview. The sudden attention reminded him of everything he hated about the world outside. Noise, greed, distraction. But deep down, he knew this wasn't going. Away, Keanu had spent the morning speaking gently to fans who came inside. He didn't sign autographs. He didn't pose for photos. He just smiled and said, I'm working on something personal right now. Thank you for understanding. Some left disappointed. Others left curious. But a few stayed behind, just to browse, to sit quietly, to listen. And that was what changed everything. One older woman sat in the poetry corner, reading aloud to her grandson. A young man pulled a book from the shelf and began writing in his journal beside the window. The bookstore, though busy, had come alive with a different kind of energy, not chaos. Curiosity. Reflection. Emily watched from the cafe window. She knew something rare was happening. She grabbed 2 coffees and walked over. Keanu was at the counter with Mr. Horace, both reviewing old pages again. The director, Daniel, had flown back to the city to start reworking the official script based on the journal's entries. But Keanu stayed, not just to prepare for the role, but because he wasn't ready to leave. "You look like 2 philosophers trying to solve a riddle," Emily said, placing the coffee between them. "Feels like that," Keanu replied, smiling faintly. Mr. Horace didn't smile, but his eyes had softened. "He's trying to convince me to write something new. Said the story doesn't end with the last page of the journal." "He's right," Emily said, "because the journal brought all of us together. That's a new story already." Mr. Horace shook his head. "I haven't written in years." Keanu leaned forward. "Then start now. Start with today. With this." He pulled out a fresh notebook and placed it in front of the old man. Mr. Horace stared at it. His hands trembled slightly. "What would I even say?" Keanu smiled gently. "Write what your father never got to say. Write what you wish you'd told him." Mr. Horace picked up the pen, held it in his hand, then put it back down. "Maybe later." Just then the door chimed. A man in a blazer and polished shoes stepped in. He looked around with judgmental eyes, then made his way to the counter. "Mr. Reeves?" he asked. "I'm Nathan Gallows, senior producer with Bright Gate Studios. I heard you're basing your next role on something you found here?" Keanu stood calmly. "Yes, this bookstore, this journal, this town." Nathan forced a smile. "We're very interested in helping you expand the story. Merchandising, books, even a limited docuseries based on the journal's entries." Keanu's face tightened. "That journal isn't for profit." Nathan chuckled. "Everything is, eventually." Mr. Horace stood abruptly. "Get out!" Nathan looked surprised. "Excuse me." "You heard me," Mr. Horace said, louder now. "You don't get to come in here and turn my father's grief into some streaming special with a dramatic voiceover and dramatic music. This story is sacred." Keanu stepped beside him. "We're not interested in deals. We're interested in truth." Nathan frowned, clearly irritated. "Fine, but when someone else offers him the same deal and takes it, don't say I didn't warn you." He left without another word. Emily looked at the 2 men. "I'm proud of you both." But the tension wasn't over. Outside, cameras were still rolling. A fan live-streamed the producer being kicked out. The clip went viral. And now, even more people wanted to know what was in the journal that had moved Keanu Reeves so deeply. Keanu knew the pressure would grow. That night, he asked Mr. Horace to take a walk. The streets were quiet again. Just the sound of their footsteps and a distant breeze. "You know," Keanu said, "when I first read your father's words, I felt like he was speaking to me. I never got to say goodbye to someone I loved. Never got to explain how empty it felt to wake up without them." Mr. Horace didn't respond at first. Then he stopped walking and looked up at the stars. "Neither did I," he said. Keanu looked at him with understanding. "Maybe," Mr. Horace continued, "maybe sharing this story isn't the worst thing. Maybe someone out there is holding onto their own silence, waiting for a voice to help them let go." Keanu nodded. "Then let's do it our way." The next morning, a letter was pinned to the front door of the bookstore. It read, "Dear visitors, this bookstore is not a tourist site. It is a place of healing, reading, and quiet. If you are here to take photos, we kindly ask you to walk away. If you are here because you believe in the power of stories, you are welcome. We are not selling a product. We are sharing a memory. Sincerely, Horace and friends." Within hours, the mood changed. Fans began leaving flowers, notes, and letters about their own grief, their own healing, their own journals. The shop started a memory box near the entrance, where, People dropped handwritten pages of love letters they never sent, apologies they never spoke, and dreams they hadn't chased. Emily read them at night and cried. Keanu helped shelve the books, served coffee to the elderly, and returned to the cabin each night to rehearse scenes rewritten with real emotion. And finally, one evening, Mr. Horace picked up that blank notebook. He wrote a single sentence. He never heard me say, "I forgave him," but I do. Now. He placed it on the counter and walked away. Keanu read the line. Then he closed the notebook and whispered, "That's the real ending." But something unexpected was still on the way. The truth behind the silence. The next morning, the bookstore door opened before sunrise. Keanu had barely finished his tea when he stepped inside. The town was quieter again. The waves of social media hype had begun to fade, replaced by something deeper. Respect. Only a few visitors now showed up, and most came alone, walking softly like entering a church. Mr. Horace sat at the counter. The old man looked peaceful, different from the bitter stranger who had once snapped at Keanu for asking about a book. "You're early," Mr. Horace said, without looking up. Keanu nodded. "I couldn't sleep." "Me neither." They sat quietly together as the light outside shifted from orange to gold. Keanu opened the blank notebook and placed it on the counter. "You ready to write more?" Mr. Horace gave a dry smile. "Maybe, just read for now." Keanu respected that. He pulled out the original journal, the one they had protected all this time. He opened to a page near the back and read aloud, "If love is a fire, then memory is the smoke that rises long after it burns." There was a long silence. "He was a poet," Keanu said. "He was a lonely man," Mr. Horace replied. "But he still believed in connection. Otherwise, he wouldn't have written these pages." Just then, Emily entered, carrying a folded newspaper. She looked pale. "You should both see this," she said, placing the paper on the table. Keanu and Mr. Horace leaned in. The headline read, "Studio plans unauthorized film based on leaked journal tied to Keanu Reeves' new project." Beneath it was a photo of Nathan Gallows, the producer who had been kicked out, holding what looked like a photocopy of one of the journal's entries. Keanu's face darkened. "How did he get those pages?" Emily whispered. Mr. Horace looked sick. "I didn't copy anything, did you?" Keanu shook his head. "Never." Emily opened her phone and searched the article. Within it, there were screenshots of passages, some word for word from the journal, others twisted and out of context, paired with phrases like a dramatic tale of loss, rebirth, and Hollywood magic. "They're turning it into something fake," she said. "This isn't what your father wrote." Mr. Horace stood. "This can't happen. I won't let them do this." Keanu looked determined. "Neither will I." They spent the rest of the day making calls. Keanu reached out to his legal team. Emily contacted local journalists. Mr. Horace even spoke with a retired librarian who once worked with his father, trying to track where the leak came from. By evening, they discovered the truth. A former intern from the production team had secretly snapped photos of the journal during a visit to Keanu's cabin when the pages were being used for script research. It was an accident waiting to happen. "I should have locked it up," Keanu said. "I let my guard down." Mr. Horace wasn't angry. Instead, he sat down and looked at the floor. "We can't erase what's out there, but maybe we can tell the truth louder." Emily looked up. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he said slowly, "we go public. Not for attention, but to protect the story from being twisted. We share it ourselves, honestly." Keanu nodded. "On our terms." The next day they recorded a video. It was simple, no fancy lights, no studio, just the three of them sitting in the back room of the bookstore. Keanu spoke first. "Some of you may have heard rumors, a journal, a movie, a story of grief. This is the truth." Mr. Horace took over. "My father wrote a journal after losing my mother. It wasn't meant to be sold or dramatized, it was how he survived." Emily added, "We're not here to make a profit. We're here to honor the words of a man who loved quietly." They read some of the real entries. Unchanged, uncut. They ended the video with a message. If you've ever lost someone, if you've ever kept your feelings silent, if you've ever held onto a memory because letting go felt like forgetting, this story is for you. They uploaded the video to Keanu's personal channel with no fanfare. Within hours it exploded. Comments poured in. I cried watching this. This is the kind of movie we need. Thank you for respecting grief, instead of profiting from it. And then, something unexpected happened. Bright Gate Studios, the ones planning to exploit the journal, backed down. The negative attention had overwhelmed them. Their statement read, "We are canceling all plans connected to the unauthorized adaptation and apologize to Mr. Reeves and Mr. Horace for the breach of trust." Mr. Horace sat back in his chair and exhaled. We did it. But Keanu wasn't done. He reached into his coat and pulled out a thin stack of papers. I've been writing too, he said. Mr. Horace raised an eyebrow. What is it? Keanu handed him the pages. A screenplay, he said. A real one. Not about Hollywood. Not about drama. About a father, a bookstore, and a journal that helped people breathe again. Mr. Horace turned the first page. The title read, The Quiet Between Pages. He read the first few lines. Interior, old bookstore, early morning. An old man sits behind the counter. A stranger enters looking for a book that doesn't seem to exist. He looked up. This is us. It is, Keanu said. But more than that, it's him, your father. Emily smiled. And it's real. Just then, the door chimed again. A young girl walked in, maybe 13 years old, holding a worn-out notebook. Hi, she said nervously. My mom passed away last year, and I've been writing letters to her ever since. I saw your video, and I just wanted to say thank you. Mr. Horace came around the counter and walked up to her. Would you like to leave a letter in our memory box? He asked gently. She nodded. Yes, please. Keanu watched as the girl placed her letter in the box, and something in him shifted. This wasn't about a movie anymore. This was about healing. About words that never got spoken finding a way to be heard. And in that tiny bookstore surrounded by old books, quiet pages, and honest people, a new story was being written. The story that saved us spring had arrived quietly. Small white flowers bloomed along the sidewalk in front of the bookstore, and the once faded wooden sign now stood freshly polished, with gold letters that read, Turning Pages, Est 1968. The whole town felt different. Lighter. Softer. People smiled more. They lingered in the cafe next door a little longer. And the bookstore? It had become something more than a place to buy books. It had become a sanctuary. Inside, Mr. Horace sat at the counter, writing in the notebook Keanu gave him. Not every day, not always for long, but often enough to remind himself that his story still mattered. Keanu sat beside him, flipping through marked-up pages of the new screenplay. It was done now. The script was honest, raw, and quiet. Just like the journal that inspired it. You know, Mr. Horace said, if someone had told me a year ago that a movie star would come walking into my store asking for a book I'd never sell, I'd have told them to get lost. Keanu smiled. If someone had told me a dusty old journal would change the way I understand grief, I wouldn't have believed it either. They both chuckled quietly. There was comfort in their silence. Now, the kind that didn't need filling. A knock came at the door, though it was open. It was Emily holding 2 coffees and a newspaper tucked under her arm. Morning, storytellers, she said. You're late, Mr. Horace teased gently. I bring caffeine, that makes me on time, she replied, handing them the cups. She unfolded the paper and laid it on the counter. On the front page was a photo of Keanu, Mr. Horace, and Emily standing outside the shop, arms around each other. The headline read, Turning Pages, How One Journal, One Shop, and One Stranger Taught the World to Grieve with Grace. Keanu looked at the photo and then said softly, It's not just about grief anymore. Emily nodded. It's about connection. And it was true. The memory box near the entrance was now full, overflowing with letters from around the world. People mailed them in. Some traveled long distances just to place their pages in person. Stories of love, forgiveness, regret, and hope. They had started to sort them, catalog them, and even hang a few of them on a special wall at the back of the store. They called it the Wall of Words. Every letter had a place, every story had a name, but one letter stood out. It arrived with no return address, just an old envelope with careful handwriting. Inside was a folded page and a photo. The page read, "To the keeper of the journal, I was once a young man who sat in the back of your store. Your father gave me a book when I couldn't afford it. He told me to pay him back when I could. I never did. But that book helped me find peace after the war. I've never forgotten him. And when I saw the video you posted, I wept. Please accept this photo. It's the last one I have of the book he gave me. I hope it reminds you of the man he truly was." Beneath the note was a photo of a worn book titled, "The Heart Remains." Mr. Horace stared at it for a long time. Then he placed it on the wall at the very top. Later that evening, Keanu received a call. The studio had approved full funding for the movie. No conditions, no rewrites, no interference, just trust. They wanted to film most of it in the bookstore in the town itself, and Keanu would co-direct it. He hung up and looked at Emily and Mr. Horace. They said yes. Emily clapped her hands and hugged him. Mr. Horace simply smiled and nodded. Let's hope they're ready for real stories. When filming began, the town welcomed it, not with red carpets, but with open doors. People offered homes to the crew, restaurants cooked extra meals. Students skipped school just to watch scenes being filmed outside the shop. Keanu wore simple clothes for his role. No makeup, no flashy sets, just truth, just silence, just stillness. One of the scenes was set inside the bookstore. It showed the character Michael, holding a journal standing across from an old man behind the counter. The actor playing the old man had studied Mr. Horace's movements carefully, but during filming, the actor forgot a line and froze. Keanu improvised. He placed the journal on the counter and said, "Some people speak through music, some speak through art. Your father?" He spoke through ink. Silence filled the room. The director yelled, "Cut!" But no one moved. Some of the crew had tears in their eyes. After the scene, Mr. Horace turned to Keanu. "You didn't plan that line, did you?" "No," Keanu said. "It just felt right. When the movie finally premiered, it didn't happen in a big city. It happened right there, in the town square. They hung a white bedsheet between two buildings and projected the film under the stars. The whole town came. Some brought blankets, some brought candles, and everyone brought someone they loved. The film was called The Quiet Between Pages, and when the credits rolled, a photo appeared. Mr. Horace's father, standing in front of the bookstore, smiling, holding his wife's hand. Below it were the words, "For those we loved, and those we still miss." Thank you for listening. As the crowd stood and clapped, Mr. Horace sat in his chair, eyes wet, face calm. "He would have liked this," he whispered. Keanu leaned in. "He's here." They sat in silence together. Not empty silence. Meaningful silence. The kind of silence that held stories. And under the stars, in a little town that most people had never heard of, a forgotten journal became a bridge between hearts. Not just on screen, but in life.